So I've decided to go from a passive setup to an active setup on my 318 Ti custom audio system. If you have no idea what that means, just stick around and learn all about it on Project Beamers, coming right up. Alright, to explain the setup that I had previously, which was the passive setup, these are some of the components that I had, just to give you guys a brief overview. This is not a 100% tutorial on how to run audio. That's another video. This is just quickly what I had and what I'm changing to. So I had these two amps. I had a Rockford Fosgate Prime. This is a 500 by 1. We'll talk about that later. 500, remember that's supposed to get 500 watts out of this. This was powering up my subwoofer. I had a JL 8W7. That's what I'm using for this build. And then on the other side here, I have a DD, which is one of my favorite brands, Digital Designs. This is one of their 2-channel amps, the C2C. See this one? So this is the 2-channel amp. What I was using this for was to power up my door speakers. I have a 3-way components in the door. Okay, just want to give you guys a better idea of how the passive setup was running in the car. So it was this DD C2C was the amp. This is a 2-channel amp. So from the head unit on the other side here, you have the input. So from the head unit, you would get your signal in here, your RCA in, right? And then the output, it's a 2-channel amp. So you have channel 1 and channel 2. Channel 1, let's say, would go to the driver door, and it would go into this is my Hertz 3-way component setup. You see here, so this is the crossover. This is a passive crossover. That's why it's called a passive setup, because the passive filter, which is this, is what is used in order to send the signals to those speakers. Full range signal, let's say frequencies from 20 to 20,000 ideally would come from here, and it would go right into this input. See this input? Then they inside have filters that would go to the woofer, which is this 6.5 inch woofer. And then they have a mid, which would be this 3-inch mid. And then you have a tweeter, which would go to that little tweeter there. Okay, so those 3 speakers would play from this one filter that got the signal from the one channel. And then channel 2 would be the same thing on the other door, on the passenger door. So that's pretty much how it's ran, and that's a passive setup. So with that setup, this is 125 watts by 2 channels. So this filter here would receive roughly 125 watts, give or take, but it would need to use some of that 125 to process and filter the frequencies so that it can send them or distribute them properly to those speakers over there. So it doesn't give each one of those 125. By all means, don't think that this gets 125, that gets 125. No, it doesn't work that way. They have to split that 125. And it's not an equal split either. So there's a little science behind it. This is not no science class, but just know that it's not an equal split of 125. They don't each get 125, and it's 125 that you have to work with these 3 speakers. Since the speakers are going to play in their accurate range, that's what the job of this filter is, to make sure that that woofer is not playing frequencies higher than what it should be playing. Since it's playing in its proper range, it's going to play efficiently is the word I'm looking for. Very efficiently. So he'll play the lower frequencies in this setup. He'll pick up I don't know where it's crossed at, but he'd pick up, let's say, in the mid-range somewhere, so that he'd also be playing some of the lows, 500 hertz or, you know, something like that you might consider in the mids. He'd be playing those. You would never want this filter to send it to this speaker, because it wouldn't play properly. It will be straining to play those notes. Same thing with the tweeter. You definitely don't want him playing low at all, because it will destroy the tweeter. So he would need some type of filter so that it would ensure that the only frequencies that are sent would be the higher ones. So this is a three-way setup. Sounds beautiful, and the way it's ran, it was sounding amazing. But in my switch to active, there's going to be a new way that these are going to be ran, and I'll explain that in the next video. All right, now back to this prime amp, the Rockford Fosgate amp. This is what I was using to power up my JL8W7 woofer that I'm using for the build. And the problem with this is not a bad amp, but it's supposed to be a 500 by 1, right? So you're supposed to get 500 by 1 channel. The configuration of this amp is that you'd get that 500 watts if the load was 1 ohm, okay? Now the 8W7 is a 3 ohm load, which means that this amp would not give 500 watts to that subwoofer. I was getting roughly, I would say, about 200, 275-ish to the woofer using this amp, being that it was a 3 ohm load. And it pretty much was the best that it can give, given the ohm load. So a better system for me, and the reason why I want to go active, is just so that I could get a more robust system, more powerful, clearer sonically, and just more efficient. So in the next videos, I'm going to explain all of the differences that I had to go through. I'm going to change the amplifier. I'm going to get an amp that's more suited for the subwoofer. And then as I'm going active, I'm going to have to add some components, change the type of filters that I'm going to use. So that'll be another tutorial type of video in the next step for this series. Okay, this is the audio series for my 318 Ti build. So that covers all the components that I was using, the speakers, the amps, the way they were ran, the setup. Now I'm going into an active setup. So there's some components. Once they come in, I'll show you what they are, and I'll show you the differences in the way that I'm going to install them. All right, so I'll see you guys soon.